Hi, and welcome to the Link Talks podcast. My name is Bonnie Ruth, and I am with Pastor Aileen Sunnock today, which I'm so excited about. And we are going to tackle a big topic today. We are going to talk about menopause.
Yes,
Everyone's like, what? But we want to tackle it because we really feel like both of us have walked through a lot of things with our health. And so we have a compassion and an empathy. And I think we also walk in experience in encouraging women, but also men.
Yes.
Couples who might be walking through this very topic and they don't even realize it. And why I'm excited is because I hope that there is some awakening and some revelation, and then there's the equipping to walk this out in a much healthier and balanced way. So we're going to start with, what is menopause?
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm excited to be here. This is a big passion of mine, just to bring awareness, like you said, to something that is really been kind of a taboo, even word to speak out.
Oh, yeah.
And so how I describe menopause is it's kind of the opposite of puberty. Puberty is kind of our bodies as women gearing up to have children or the capacity to have children. And then menopause is really our body gearing down to stop having children or stop the ability to have children. Yeah. And basically, in a very simple way, that's what it's. That's what it is. And it's really God designed. It's a God designed process that we go through as women.
Yeah.
And so
I think what's really key about what you just said is it's God designed. Because as we'll get into, and I think if anyone's listening and whether they're in menopause or they're facing something physically, we oftentimes feel like we're broken.
Yes.
Or we feel like we're losing our minds because we can't figure out what is happening with me. And so I just want to set the stage with exactly what you just said. And I know it's your heart because we've talked about it a lot, is that our bodies are sometimes doing God-designed things. And in that, we can find a rhythm with it. And so I just want to hear from you, like just a little bit of your story and what brought you into being passionate about this topic, because it obviously is something that you've experienced.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, my experience with menopause was I really didn't know much about it. When I was going through it, there wasn't a lot of internet. There wasn't a lot of like easy access information. So I had to really research. I had to figure out really what was happening. It was a long process for me. One of the things that people don't realize too is that menopause, or really pre-menopause, perimenopause, can begin as early as 35.
Wow.
It's early. It's earlier than we think it is.
And people don't tell you that. They really don't.
No.
So that's a key piece of information right there. Yeah.
Yes, especially if you're going through challenges, which with menopause, women can have different symptoms. Some can be similar and some, I've never experienced that, or, oh yes, I'm going through that. So we can have a lot of that can just be unfamiliar or not similar, I guess.
Yeah.
So my story is menopause was kind of difficult for me. First of all, in ministry, we live in a fishbowl. Is kind of what we say. We love what we do, but one of the downsides is we kind of live in a fishbowl. So when I was kind of in the throes of my menopause, we were starting our church.
Okay.
One of the things that really threw me was I was starting to have panic attacks, which can be one of the symptoms. Anxiety, panic attacks. I wasn't sleeping good, which attributed to the panic and the anxiety. And so what would happen is my anxiety would come on in crowds, which in our business and our calling, that's what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we would, I would just have these panic attacks. And at first I didn't realize what they were. And then when we realized what was causing them, we discovered a way to alleviate them a little bit in our situation. And so when the music would, when worship would start, I would walk in. I didn't have to be around people. I didn't have to interact, which was could be triggering for me. And it wasn't anybody. It was just what's happening in me. They were lovely people, but it was just the circumstance. And then when James would do the altar call, everybody would close their eyes. I would slip back into his office. One of the challenges was some people were commenting on, where's Aileen? She's not friendly. She's,
forming opinions that
weren't really true. And so that was a bit of a challenge, but we navigated through that just the best we could at the time, because we were still navigating. We didn't really understand it. So sometimes in ministry, you've got to walk through it before you can maybe clue everybody in, because you just don't know. In this particular situation, that's how we felt. So what we did was we then told our staff, James told the staff.
That's wise.
What I was going through. We told our sons, who were young adults, this is what's happening. You're going to be married one day and your wife's going to go through this. We just want you to be aware. It's not anything you've done. If mom's having a bad day, it's not you, but we just have to have some grace. And so it was very challenging on our marriage. One of the statistics that we read was 73% of divorces they will attribute to menopause.
Wow.
And that
that's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. That is high. And what our heart, as we share this as much as we can, is to bring awareness that they might not even be aware at the time that's what's the cause of it, or how to help, how to navigate through some of the challenges. They just make that decision. And it's...
Well, and think about how, the statistic is just mind-blowing in itself. But when you bring that into our church world, right, into the faith community, that could be something that we want to try to ignore, I think. But I'll say it this way, why it's so important that you guys are addressing this topic as passionately as you are is because we've got to make people aware that, let's go back to the panic attack thing, right? We want to faith that away, but sometimes everything is natural and spiritual.
Right.
And so if you only address something like that in a spiritual component, then you're missing a big piece that's not partnering with that spiritual component. And so what I love about what you're bringing is that you're empowering couples within the faith community to not just pray it away. Right. There's some natural things that you guys did, some very practical things that you implemented. And you had to navigate people's expectations, but we got to do that anyways, if we're being honest in ministry. And so you just had to do it around that. But what you just shared is so empowering. And go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, let me add to that, because the way you said that was really important. We prayed a lot. We were like, God, lead and guide us through this. What do we need to do? But at the same time, when you said the natural part of it, what was happening with me is part of the menopause, symptom was I wasn't sleeping. I kind of thought it was a superpower. I was waking up, 2 or 3, I'd go downstairs. I couldn't sleep, so I'd watch a little TV, and then pretty soon it was 6 o'clock. I'd get up and I'd go about my day. Well, that went on for a year. And our bodies are not designed to not sleep. And so what happened was that perpetuated the anxiety for me. That perpetuated the panic attack for me. And so I ended up actually in the emergency room because I woke up one night after a year of not sleeping and these panic and anxiety issues. And I just woke up at midnight and just said to James, something is terribly wrong. You've got to take me to the hospital. So we went to the emergency room. Thankfully, we had an ER doctor that said, I know exactly what's wrong. They checked everything out. Oh, he said, my wife's going through this. I know what's wrong.
What a God moment.
What a God moment.
Wow.
He had such compassion, and I hadn't had that experience everywhere in the medical field. And he gave me something for the anxiety temporarily, but I had to make myself stay in bed and reverse that habit of getting out of bed. I'm awake. So So I would just, for probably a week or two, I just had to discipline myself to stay in bed, go back to sleep. And then I realized I would go back to sleep. Yeah. And then after a while, the anxiety would subside because I was getting my sleep.
Right. The other natural thing that you partnered with,
yes,
how you guys were asking the Holy Spirit for wisdom, or the prayer that you pray. I know you guys, you're praying people. So I know you were doing some prayers.
Yes, for sure.
But you partnered it. And I think that's a really beautiful thing for people to hear. Yeah. And I hope that just that little nugget, if they don't get anything today, like partner some spiritual with some natural so that you can get some answers. Because what I love about how you share your story, Pastor Aileen, is that you want people to have the answers that they need for their situation and how menopause is affecting them as individuals and as a couple. And so I just want to encourage our Link listeners, like lean in and take some of these nuggets, like hear through the stories, the nuggets, because you're dropping some really good, like just practical nuggets. Yeah. So tell me a little bit, once you guys kind of had that moment with the doctor, what was that like with you and Pastor James? How did that impact you guys as a couple?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was important to communicate and communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Because really what happens with couples is there's friction, there's conflict, and they lean out and during this season. And we had to really intentionally lean in.
That's good.
And it wasn't always easy. It was
not always fun.
Not always
or
fun.
Maybe fully authentic.
Right.
Let's just be honest.
Yes, let's be honest. It was difficult.
Yeah.
We aren't a couple that argues. We're pretty good about communicating generally. James always jokes because I'll say, I don't want to argue. And he goes, we're not arguing. We're having a discussion. And so that's our dynamic.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's our dynamic. But at the same time, I was very angry and I was very irritable. And I would just argue about things. Yeah. And it was very difficult, just a really difficult time. But we had to learn to communicate and we had to learn to, like I said, lean in and be intentional that our relationship was important. Yeah. And I'm not saying it was easy, but we were committed to our covenant, our marriage covenant.
That's good.
And so we knew we just had to figure out how to do this. And so for us, it was just a process of, James having a little grace, me trying to listen and kind of take the blinders off to go, I need to hear what he's saying. Yeah. But I guess what I want to be very transparent and honest about is it was difficult. Yeah. So I want couples to hear that. Yeah. It wasn't like difficult on a level. Yeah. It was difficult.
Yeah.
And there were times where it was like, this is too hard.
Yeah.
Just to be really honest, it was like, this is hard. Because I mentioned earlier, we live in a fishbowl. It just felt like it added a lot of pressure. Yeah. So for those in ministry, I want them to hear there's an element of that, but you've got to find that space to have that sanctuary or that privacy to walk through some things. Not that you're hiding it, but just
that's good.
The space to walk through it.
Yeah. And I think it's finding that balance, to go back to what you shared earlier. You were talking about how you guys were honest with your team and your family. And Jason and I had a point in time where we were lead pastors at the height of my, I have a bit of a different story where I was medically put into menopause. Right. Didn't know what I was signing up for, but I did. And so we kind of knew, sort of, but to the intensity that we would experience, we didn't know. And we had to do the same thing. Like, it was a moment where I had panic attacks as well. Okay. And so I'm on stage doing announcements and I literally full on panic attack hit and I just had to walk off the stage. Yeah. And so that was a little bit public. So we did communicate a little bit to the congregation, but we had already communicated to our team. and to our family and our leaders and our close friends what was happening. And so there was ability for them to buffer that, because as you talked about earlier, you had to navigate the expectations or the assumptions of people. And as leaders, we do have to be mindful of that. Like, how do we steward the role that we're in and how people are perceiving that? We can't be responsible for it, but how do we steward the environment? And so I think that's really important for people in ministry there's a balance of being totally and completely vulnerable to let's share what we need to so that there's not room for assumption.
I agree.
Because good communication breeds confidence. So I hear you saying that within you and Pastor James' relationship, but also within your leaders, with your family. And in our situation, unfortunately, we had to do that with the church a little bit. But I think there's so much power. It empowers you to walk through that. So what would be, when you say difficult, and I know because you've shared with me a little bit, but I want to dig in that a little bit, if you're okay with it. When you say difficult, what would be a few tips that you would give a couple, especially in ministry, because I think there's different dynamics with that, of you're in a moment and it's real difficult. What are some practical and spiritual steps that they can take to navigate a moment where you're like, we're not going to make it right now?
Okay. I have a few really good tips.
Yeah.
One of them is, remember, I'm speaking from the woman's perspective.
Yeah. That's
Your husband is not the enemy. So just kind of let that set in.
Yeah.
Your husband's not the enemy. You're a team.
That's good.
Remember that a lot of men just don't understand this process. Even though we don't understand it, they really don't understand.
Yeah, exactly.
So, keep that in mind. They're trying to help. Also remember, an apology goes a long way. If you've had a really bad day, or, if I snapped at James, the quicker I went and said, I'm really sorry, or my boys, my sons, they have often commented that meant a lot to them when I would just come to them and say, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
So an apology goes a long way.
Yeah, it does.
And it brings people back together. So I would say that is really important to remember. It's humbling, but it's so freeing as well, because the enemy won't have a place. We always, think when we're vulnerable or, those kind of things, that it's not a safe place, but it really is. That's the enemy saying that's not safe, but God's going, no, that's where freedom is.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. So I would say that is really important. I would say even counseling is really important.
Yes.
We love winning at home.
Yeah.
I have a counselor that I see that has just helped me through a lot of things, but they also will counsel couples.
Yeah.
And we've gone on a marriage intensive to learn how to better communicate.
Yeah.
That helped really quite a bit to just, invest in our relationship. What are our weaknesses? Where do we need to grow? And one of them is we can always grow in communication, right? Yeah. That's just important. So I would say that. I would say friendships are really important. If they're life-giving friendships.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
You really need friends that are going to push you back together and direct you to God. We really need friendships to keep us, we can think stupid things and we can think wrong. We can go, I've had conversations with my friends where they go, Aileen, during menopause, you can think the opposite of what's actual fact. Yeah. And they're just so gracious, and they've been such good friends to just go, I don't think you're thinking that through.
Yeah.
I think you need to go back and talk with James or, look at that again. Yeah. And those are the kind of friendships you need.
Yeah. Not
that are going to commiserate with you and go, life's stupid. And, you need friends that are going to go, I understand. Let's get our focus back. You need to be able to vent or maybe talk things through.
Yeah.
But you really need friends that are going to lead you back to Christ and to, certainly back to your husband.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I think that's so good because it sounds like a simple tip, but really it's one that is a safeguard.
Right.
If it's the right person, right? Or the right people.
Yeah.
Because when you go to that person, they should know, like that person should know you well enough to know that you're thinking a little bit off. And to be able, I had a friend who would ask me, well, did you say that to Jason?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I said that to Jason. Like, really, you said that to Jason? Okay, yeah, that's a different conversation. Just bringing me into my own self.
Yes.
And I think that's, it's a powerful tool in our tool belt, because when we are walking through something like this, I said this to you earlier, it's like you're watching yourself outside yourself and you're like, I mean, I remember standing, I will never forget this moment, standing in our living room, and I am having a moment. Let's just say, like, no one would have thought I loved Jesus or Jason. It was not a good moment. And I'm literally seeing myself outside myself, and I'm thinking, you have lost your mind.
Yes.
You are not okay. Like, you are not okay, Bonnie Ruth. But I couldn't reel it back. Like, I didn't know what to
Totally
do.
understand.
Yes. And we were talking about how those moments are very real. And I think us being honest about that, so that when there's a woman in her living room and she is having that moment, she's not going to quit. She's not going to give up. She's not going to quit on her marriage. She's not going to quit on herself.
Right.
But she's going to go to that friend. And you and I have actually called each other over the years when we're like, this is happening. Has this ever happened to you?
Yes.
I remember one conversation, I was at work and I actually I need a break. I'm going to call my friend Aileen. And we had like a 30-minute conversation, and you just encouraged me. And we were able to encourage each other because we've had a little bit of similar things. And I'll never forget you saying to me, Bonnie Ruth, have you talked to Jason about this? Because I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed how I was acting, but I felt so out of control. So I want to have you speak to the woman that might be in her living room. And then we're going to also talk to the husband who might be watching her in their living room. But let's start with the woman. Like, how can she not give up on herself? And how can she not give up on him?
Okay. The first thing I'm going to say is be in the Word. That kind of makes me a little emotional, because there's been a few times in my life where I had to really, I couldn't focus on reading because when you're in menopause, sometimes like your brain is a little foggy and a little, like, it's just hard to focus. So I would listen to the Word as much as I could. And God's Word heals and restores.
Yeah.
Just the very fact that we're hearing it is restoring and healing our mind, body, and spirit. So that's one thing I did. So I would say just be in the Word. Let God just minister to you that way. And I would literally all day when I was doing housework or, driving or whatever, as long as there wasn't someone that I need to be intentionally in a conversation with, I would just listen. And over time, that just really helped me a lot. So I would say that. I would also say, this is very easy to say, but hard to hear sometimes, but don't believe the enemy. That, as you said earlier, that's just kind of my saying I say to women is, you're not broken. Yep. God didn't make a mistake. Yeah. God created you. God knew what he was doing. God loves you. God calls you beautiful. Yeah. Believe the good things from God and try to not listen to the enemy especially during the season, because we can just really easily believe lies. Yeah. And so I would say that. And I would just say, don't pick up shame.
That's good.
Shame can really hook us during this time.
Yes.
Because we behave in ways that we wished we hadn't. We kind of lash out, or we, maybe don't have the energy we used to, and we can't really do the things we used to, or, there's just a number of things. Yeah. We forget things, we're like, I'm sure this happened, or I'm sure this didn't happen. And it's not true. So, just don't try not to pick up shame.
Yeah.
Or talk to somebody about that if you've picked up shame, and just take it to Jesus, because shame can really hinder our growth and our process, I guess, or progress in it. And I would say, really take care of yourself. I had to really, it took me a long time, and I wasn't good at this at every stage of my menopause journey, but sugar was a really horrible thing for me. It kind of messed with my mind and certainly was addictive for me. Caffeine wasn't real helpful to me. So I would kind of maybe look at self-care, be kind to my first counselor during my process was about 10 years older than I was, Christian woman. And she said, Aileen, you're a little fragile right now. Now, it doesn't mean you have to check out and not take care of your family or your job or whatever, but you're a little fragile and you need to be aware of that.
That's good.
And find the ways that you need to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's not spending a lot of money. It's just self-care.
That's good.
It's being kind to yourself. It might be a rest. It might be a walk. It might be something like that.
That's really good. I mean, there's so much packed in what you just said. That's amazing. I want to encourage people to find an Aileen or find someone who, like even your counselor, right? 10 years older. Find someone who's gone through it. Because then that also can quiet the shame. Because the word of God says when we confess one to another, right, that's not just our sin. That's not just when we've done something bad. Although menopause can make you do not some great things, right? But it's not just our sin. It's when we don't know what to do with ourselves. And when you're walking through menopause, you don't know what to do with yourself sometimes. And so I think it quiets the shame. So I just want to encourage the listeners to find that person. Interview counselors. Hey, how old are you? Like, ask the questions that will help lead you to the right person to share with you some of these things, who will be honest and is trustworthy. As we wrap up, I want to go back to the question of what would you encourage the husbands? Yeah.
I think a couple things. Menopause isn't an excuse for us as women to behave badly.
That's good.
We might have said that before, but I'm going to say that again. So it's not a time to, your husbands are not the enemy. Be kind to them. But on the flip side, I would say learn to be a good listener. And you don't have to have the answer. Just be a good listener and try to be a little understanding. Maybe do a little research, kind of understand what she's going through. I would say that. I would say it's often good to have maybe just some, I would say just some time where you're asking, how can I help?
That's good.
That might be it.
Maybe
Maybe practical things are difficult. Maybe, you're forgetting things or whatever. Just some practical ways to kind of help alleviate some of the stress. I would say also, I'm having a little moment where I can't remember that. This is what I'm going to say. Be gracious and don't make fun of what she's going through to her or particularly to other people.
That's good.
Sometimes it can be like a joking thing or whatever, but it's very humbling to not be able to remember things or to go through all of this.
Don't add to the shame.
Don't add to the shame. So I would say that, be kind. If you're a couple that can make, kind of be lighthearted about things, that's something that is really helpful, but it's gotta be, you gotta know your,
you gotta know your
audience.
own rhythm. Yeah, exactly. That's good.
So I would say, be kind, encourage others, maybe family members or, if you're in ministry, maybe others in a very positive and honoring way.
That's good.
If they say something, what's going on or, how do we navigate through this? Be supportive and be their advocate and be
powerful.
their champion and, cheer them on.
Yeah.
Sometimes James would just say, you're going to be great.
Yeah.
Life's going to get better.
Yep.
We're going to be great.
Yep.
We're in this together.
Yeah.
And I needed to really hear that because I felt like things were falling apart.
Yeah, exactly.
So husbands can really just ask your wife.
Yeah.
Talk about it. Because what might be helpful to me might not be to someone else. But at the same time, we're all a little bit similar.
Yeah.
So I would say just be encouraging, be affirming, remind us we're not broken. Life's going to get better and you're doing great. I'm so proud of you. All those kind of things are really quite helpful when you're in the midst of it, right?
Yeah. I think that's good. I appreciate your vulnerability with today's conversation because it's not a lighthearted topic. No. I know we've laughed a little, but it's not lighthearted. It's a very real, it's very intense. But you also brought some just very practical, simple, and I say that not to minimize what you've shared, but the simplicity also of what you've shared gives it to us in pieces that we can do this. Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to say to everybody. You don't have to lose yourself. You're not broken, and you don't have to lose your marriage.
Yes.
Right? And 100%. Communication is the key at marriage in the first place. And if we can just lean into that tool alone and the power of the Holy Spirit, we're going to be okay.
Absolutely.
We're going to be okay.
Absolutely.
And I think you and I get to sit here today and what we've walked through and say, you're going to be okay.
Yes.
And to know that confidently, that if you will lean in, like you said, and you'll apply these practical, simple, but very powerful tips, you're going to make it.
Absolutely.
And so thank you for the vulnerability. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you've taken away some practical tips, but also that you have been empowered to go have the conversation with your spouse, to look inside yourself and see, where am I and what do I need? So thank you for joining our conversation today.